I got some exciting information to share tonight. I was presenting at a dairy conference in Nashville, and what are the dairy producers and the world's largest grain shippers and the largest grain storing, shipping companies in the United States? What are they thinking about fertilizer and the actual supply of the grains, mainly corn for the feed, and the transition into renewable diesel, which is just absurdity in itself. So we're going to walk through a couple things. Just a distant early warning. If the highest levels of food production in America are trying to secure anything at any price right now because they know they might not be able to get it, you might want to take a cue or a note from that. Follow the money. And luckily I was there presenting, and a couple things dovetailed with, the information that they're looking for in terms of the fertilizer production is one of the main things. Now, right now on the Mississippi River, the day I was there, this is 2 days ago when I presented, I spent 4 days up in Nashville. By the way, that place is pumping with 5G. I felt so angsty and so edgy, and you could just feel it literally in the air. You could feel it in the air, like the soup of frequency. You're in a frequency soup, heavy, intense, and you could. It was pulling on me, and I finally got back here. And once we got out of Nashville, and we were driving back through some of these smaller roads to get back here. I kind of just let off, and you could feel an actual. A lot of people talk about being in a haunted house or something. They feel it's super heavy, dark, angsty kind of, and then they step out and totally that feeling's gone. That's the same way getting out of Nashville driving. Once you reach a certain point past that where the 5G stops, the mood changes there. You can actually feel the frequency around your body shift, which is downright scary because it seems to be pumping at full throttle around that area where even sometimes when they even have these massive 5G towers, I could feel it in my teeth. My teeth actually turn metallic tasting when we go near these 5G towers in the downtown area. Really freaky. And I even had one thing made my head literally buzz when we were near one of those towers downtown. And I'm this is just not healthy again. I got to get out of here. So grains and food supply inbound is going to have a significant difficulty moving forward in 2023. I was there to talk about the Tonga eruption, which happened in January of 2022. Not many of you heard about it. I was surprised, And he and I were conversing with his wife, and check out his Substack channel there. He tossed an article up about our meeting and some of the ideas I was explaining there. We had this massive eruption from Tonga, which was at least twice as high with the ash ejecta into the atmosphere as Mount Pinatubo, which cooled the Earth 0.7 degrees Celsius. Well, this is on par to cool it around 1.5, possibly 2 degrees Celsius. So I marched through all the temperature data on all these South American countries experiencing record cold, coldest September, coldest June, July, and you could really see the onset as the months are progressing. The cooler temperatures are actually visible in the temperature data record now. So when they release, like in Paraguay and Uruguay and Chile and Argentina and Brazil, Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand, once they released their data, it really showed significant cooling. I was really shocked. Chile in some areas is 5 degrees Celsius cooler than the averages over 30 years right now. And the crop guys were there. They're like 5C. That's a zero yield out of there. It's like even 3C is a significant, almost right now. you'll be happy to get anything at all. Anything.
Zero yield out of there.
Now, this is where we're going into in the Southern Hemisphere. So all these traders and everybody up here is petrified of the availability of food, fertilizers, farm inputs, pesticides, herbicides.
Now, this is where we're going into in the Southern Hemisphere.
But at the same time, they're like, okay, we'll just see what happens in the Southern Hemisphere. This is a let's see, because that's kind of the way the market moves. All right, we know it's atrocious up here.
This is where we're going into in the Southern Hemisphere.
They were talking literally of the amount of food not being grown. We were down 700 million bushels this year in America. 700 million down. So I wasn't unaware of this in the pipeline. So we had a supply chain guy there that was really deep into. That's all they do is shuttle barges for grain down the Mississippi and on rail. Like usually they'll get the grains in the Midwest, but everything's failed. So they're way over in Ohio buying grain, trying to move it across the states, but not enough labor in the rail supply. So they're constricted there. They can't move. Barge traffic's locked up across the Mississippi River. They say it's going to take until, what was that, April or so for any of this, if it were to, under perfect circumstance, wind its way out and let the supply chains function correctly and evenly again. That's what we're looking at. And that's what these heads of the largest dairy farms in America that provide your milk, your whey, your protein powders, onward for baby formula, etc. And they were marching through all the things that are about to be affected. Now, some of the stuff with the cattle genetics is this crazy one too, because they were talking about methane reductions, because, you know, the whole methane thing, they're trying to demonize the dairy industry and the cattle industry. It's too much methane, too much methane. Sheep got to go in Australia, New Zealand. So what they're doing is they're doing genetics of the cattle to remove methane. So certain types of cattle that they found, the way they process the food releases less methane. So in the genomics, they're saving those embryos and whatnot and bringing them up and IV and into these other cattle to try to produce the next generation. And they say there's about a 5% reduction in methane by, I'm not going to say GM cows. Not they don't genetically do anything with it. They just choose the species and then save an enormous amount of embryo and then have that birth on to the next generation. And they're saying that each successive cattle generation, about 3 years, is going to reduce, that cow's output will be reduced by 5%. So they were saying by 2050, which is bonehead idiots up in Canada, were saying, this is the Canadian Agricultural Association, Dairy Association, had set itself a target to go zero emissions by 2050. So they already locked themselves in a corner. Like, why would they do that? But anyway, they're saying, okay, so from now to 2020 to 2050, that's 30 years. We should have 10 generations at approximately 5%. So they were looking somewhere between 30 and 50% methane reductions by using genetics out of the cattle. So these are the kind of things that they're onto already. And, you know, Ransom, I'd like to go through it with you because, I don't know, we're seeing a lot of strangeness happening, and this is really shaking me awake to the point where, you know, these guys that are contract growing on 100,000 acres couldn't get their crops out. Total losses, they call it burn down. And another thing before, Ransom, is crops, when they're harvested, they usually do an average over a county or a part of a state with multiple counties that are coming in on an average when they do the crop tours on the local side, not the USDA or the Pro Farmer Tours. Generally, when they go out and they'll run through the crops, it'll be a local assessment from the local co-op. But what they're finding this year, they can't bunch anything in averages anymore because the losses are so spread out. They're saying it's the largest amount of variability in crops that they've ever seen. So literally across the street, you could have a burned down zero yield, and then across the street, you could have 100 bushels an acre, you could have 200 bushels an acre, literally across the street. So they can't do average like yield any longer. So this is creating a backup in the data that you're going to receive. So hang loose. You're not seeing any of the losses yet. Now, could this be an excuse as why they're waiting so long to put data out? It sounds like it is a perfect excuse to not release the data until later on in the year, and then create the panic around Christmas or New Year's, Thanksgiving time. But what they're seeing out there, this is like, you know, I have a pond and it's full of black swans. There's like 50 black swans out on this pond swimming around. That's kind of the takeaway I got after hearing all these dairy and cattlemen, grain producers, shippers and logistics talking. And like I said, these are the top of the American markets and also into Europe. And it's sitting there listening, and Canada, excuse me, both, all Canada. It was frightening to listen to it, knowing what I know. And then I added the volcanic, emission reduction of temperatures and the crop losses in the southern hemisphere. And you just see their eyes and oh man, they're smacking their foreheads going, oh, and how are we going to get grain for our cattle? And then this goes into the whole lease lands thing. And I don't know, man, there's so much to digest after that. I was almost numb to see what's coming. Really, it was numbing to see how much damage there's been in the agricultural industry that's not being reported on. It is, it's still taking me another day to just like realize, just put into realization and take notes and figure it all out, because it is catastrophic. I mean, beyond catastrophic. They can't get their grains. Oh, man. Anyway, Ransom, I'm rambling, and thanks for joining me tonight. I'm here with Ransom Godwin, as always, and not really sure we're streaming tonight. Forgive me for not putting out the links up on Vigilante TV and LinkedIn. I was on the road, and I just drove back from Nashville. I literally got in like 20 minutes before we're starting the program here, poured myself a cold one, and I'm ready to hear you, Ransom. What's on the news? What are you seeing in the world? Like, we're going to frame it as, turds in the punch bowl now. Your move. You going to fish that one out or what?
No, I'm not an apple bobber kind of guy. I don't know. I'll stay away from the turd in the punch bowl. That's how you get COVID.
I never. That's funny.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's the same old news. And you know what? A little bit. I'm feeling like Nostradamus, because we've had these discussions before, and I put out a couple predictions. One of them would be that 2023. Obviously, we've been talking about that. That's going to have a bunch of food problems. Here's front page Zero Hedge. The food crisis of 2023 is going to be far worse than most people would dare to imagine. So are they? I don't know if he's talking about us, because we imagined it for some time now, and here it is. The naysayers that were kind of saying, oh, it's doom and gloom and fear porn and all that. Well, now it's all catching up. The global food crisis is a term that everybody's using in all of the countries, because it is a real situation. It's not make-believe. It may have been created. It may have started out fictional, but now it's completely nonfiction there. So 2023, is it going to be far worse than most people would dare to imagine? Well, I imagined it pretty bad. I hope it's a lot better than that. But here's some other predictions that we talked about. Remember, I said that there would be, this year would be the first year that they put publicly battle droids on the field in war situations. So that has now happened. The Netherlands has deployed 4 armored ground robots, or unmanned ground vehicles. And this is just a little step into that, to get you used to the idea that some of these conflicts that I'm sure are about to sprout into new areas are going to be somewhat unmanned. Not unmanned on the death side or the killing side, but unmanned on the killer side of it. And here's some first examples of this. And, it's ironic that Elon Musk put out that cheap $20,000 robot that could barely walk. It looked like he could kick it over. They have much better stuff than that. And so does DARPA and all of these military industrial complex. And they're all going in this direction of AI. And I've said it many times, part of the project for a new American century outlined by 2025, we would have a completely AI Air Force. And if you've been paying attention to recent events, a lot of the military, or traditional military people that were in careers, have recently left not only the Air Force, the Army, the Marines, the Coast Guard, etc., over, one of those banned topics that we're not allowed to talk about. But they decided to leave, which puts it in a weird position, because it's making what was a polarized, or should I say, multifaceted opinions in militaries are now getting shrunk down to only one type of people with one type of opinion, which is very scary if you know how parties take over and become one-party systems. Another prediction that I said would be that right around this time, after the U.S. got rid of all of its old military hardware, which we know they've been doing a bunch, and all of this stuff is going into the arena of the Ukraine, not just the robots, but all of our old material, all of our old guns, bombs, etc., are all getting shipped in there. And I predicted that right after we did that, we'd pop out with the new tech, and here it is, right here, the Northrend Grumman, if I could talk right. And they're not the only company, but all of these military industrial complex companies are about to show their new toys that they have. So Northrend is about to put out the replacement for the B-2 bomber and other bombers. This is supposed to be a game changer, according to them. They're saying this is going to change everything. And this is in a time where, let's face it, China's military is catching up to the U.S. Here's front page MSN, continuing to talk about how China's military is emerging as a true competitor to the U.S. under Xi Jinping. And they go on to talk about how many, millions of service members that they have. But not just that, they have just completed and shipped out their third aircraft carrier. And this third one is the first to be designed and built in China. So you can predict they're going to keep on pushing out more and more naval assets, and this is where it's going. So we're all preparing for a world war. It's right out in the open. Both parties of the United States are, giddy about it. They're really happy about it, it seems. And in the backdrop is this food crisis of 2023. So war, famine, and disease. This is what to expect in 2023, and it's all planned and brought to you by some pretty elite people. I recently was watching Bill Gates talking about how that they are going to start punishing countries that don't do what they want to do. So, and also admitting that the entire Ukrainian war is designed to put an end to petroleum so that they could push in the Western world, at least, not in the other parts of the world, but just in the Western world, all of these new failed green technologies, which basically means that they have decided that one side of a potential conflict is already going to lose due to not having energy, manufacturing, and it's a destruction of one system. So they've admitted that they're going to this new green system, which includes them pushing these fake products, fake foods, fake everything, and get ready for the bugs, because they are coming out, and I've recently started seeing them in the stores near me. So this is a pre-planned project to completely replace what we call food and usher in a new era of government-controlled starvation is basically what it is. They're lowering the nutrition everywhere and getting people used to eating these rations. We've talked about it, but it's all coming true right now. It's not a story. It's not going to be, in the future. It's not something we have to worry about for later. It's all coming together right now in real time, and you can see it. I'm going to pull up some more ads while you kind of rebut to that. But think about this. Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab and all of these people are openly admitting that they are causing war, famine, and disease for the good of the planet. They don't exactly say that, so you can't coin me on, word for word. That's my translation. But they are saying things right out in the open. And if you remember, another thing that I predicted would be that after this recent medical experience that the world had, that, if I was in an elite position, I might let out one that was more deadly into the public after a lot of people had issues with the first concept of their products. So now that all of those people that came out and their conspiracy theorist friend is turning out to be right, the companies are admitting what we've been saying. I'm not going to repeat it because you can still get banned for saying what they say. But they are admitting that things didn't work the way they wanted it to, or if at all. People are getting sick from, different things. But this next wave of stuff, if you've noticed in the news headlines that they've discovered that, some scientists in Boston are kind of bragging that they made a new virus, a COVID virus, at a level 4 place, and that it kills 80% of all the mice and mammals they give it to. So just food for thought there. That would only make sense if you were trying to do a certain something to a population, that you would kind of give them a beta, and all of the people that were worried about or had questions about it, they would back off from that. But then the next time they would also be hesitant to ever do any kind of medical help from those same people. But what happens if the next strain is actually 80% kill rate on it? So no telling what card they're about to play. But they're all big and they're all negative. So if somebody's out there waiting for this one single event that's going to change the world, let me tell you, there have been millions of little events over the past couple of years that have already irreparably changed the world. So it's going to be fun to see how this rolls out. Not in the ha-ha way, but maybe in the I told you so, or I did mention it a little bit, that these things are happening, and they really are happening. So we're about to see robot wars. And recently, somebody was pointing out, I forgot the guy's name, Degrassi, I think is his name. He's a pretty famous scientist, the guy with the afro. But he was recently on a late night.
Neil Tyson deGrasse.
Yeah, exactly. And he's saying, I don't understand why everybody's worried. We're using new nuclear weapons. It's not like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We don't have a radiation problem, so it's no big deal if we set off a bunch of nukes, because it's basically like regular warfare at this point. It's just a big explosion. There's no after effects. And that is the future of nuclear weapons. But don't kid yourself. They do have different types of these nuclear weapons. Some of them have a shelf life of 50,000 years if they're using some of these plutonium ones. If they're using stuff more like neutron bombs, they can totally devastate a country with explosions of pure force and not leave any fallout radiation, which means that any group or country or army could move in right afterwards and take over, and not only take over, but use the destroyed buildings, equipment, etc. So, wow, we are in sci-fi land, but it's not fiction.
Sometimes I wish it were. So let me address a couple of those points on what I had learned and listened to over the last 4 days. Now, in my presentation, I was talking about electrical demand in Europe has nowhere remotely reached the peak demand that will occur in November, December, January, February. Now, there is a cycle in electrical usage that you can see it going back as far as they've kept data in Europe. The periphery seasons like spring and fall, people are not running the AC too much. They're not running the heater too much. It's like that Goldilocks temperature zone for a good 4 months, maybe 5 months of the year. You get those 2.5 month blips on both sides of the winter and the summer. And if the summer's not so warm, depends on where you are, you might not even need to run the AC. You can run fans. But as we move forward into what is beginning right now, so as we come into the end of November, they're starting to spike up. December, January is the ultimate peak rate along with February, and then it starts to drop off. The thing is, those who were trying to obtain fertilizers have come to the realization that there will not be any coming out of Europe at all this year. None. The thing is that the governments over there, and this is firsthand from myself of some of my contacts in Europe, that the governments over there have decided to stop all industry and redivert that power into the homes because they understand that street protests and violent overthrows of governments in the middle of freezing, starving citizens is a no-go. So they're going to sacrifice business through the winter, and they're going to try to restart it in spring when the electrical demand is dropping, and then they can take that and move it right over to the factories. And at that point, you talk about forecasts. In March and April of this year, you're going to watch all this news come out asking people to use the least amount of electricity as they can, with the understanding that, we let you survive through this winter by turning off all industry in Europe. And the least you can do is turn off and use the least amount of power you can possibly use so we can redivert that and start our economy back, which will be atrocious at that point. It's already atrocious anyway, but like double atrocious, triple atrocious. And at that point, we're going to start the economies back up, but you just don't fire up a steel refining operation. You don't just fire back up a zinc smelter. And one of my contacts from BASF in Germany, no less, said that their plant, and I'd asked him because I'd read this before. After World War II, they started this one chemical plant in 1953. It has never shut even one day. Now, from the original plant that they built, it is now 6 square miles. And he tells me that they don't even waste a single molecule in a process. That any process that's done, if there is a byproduct, not a single molecule of gas is wasted. So find a way to make a new product from that, knowing that this will be a stream coming off of another process. The problem is they are going to start shutting this plant down. And he says to me, you know, when they try to restart this thing, the pressures and some of the things that haven't had a lot of pressure on it because it's been a continuous open flowing system, that they've never ever since the 50s even turned any of these valves and gears, levers down to zero and then tried to start it again and equalize pressure so nothing blows out on the O-rings or the pipes themselves, or there was, you know, there's glass tubing and just a huge amount of, infrastructure that could be damaged with too high of pressure. So they're fearful that when they shut this plant down, or even parts of it, that they'll never get it back up and running again. And they're definitely not talking about this with the German public, and BASF being one of the largest chemical producers. Huge problem. That is just one of the 75 chemical plants that have closed down. I mean, down to zero. Zero. There's nothing coming out of there. Nothing. And it's going to continue as they roll through high demand because they can't produce the demand. Like this guy that was going through some of the, you know, I had talked about the electrical demand. And I showed it in a chart that I did, you know, my presentation in the morning, overlapping the volcanic eruption in Tonga and the southern hemisphere crop losses, and showing those charts that, you know, if you think it's bad now in Europe for nothing coming out, it's going to get less than zero. I do remember there was a movie, Less Than Zero. What's that guy's name? Julian in there. See, I knew a guy named Julian. We always used to kid him because I knew him at that same time that movie came out. So you got to be that old, I guess. But the things that are about to happen and the breakdowns in the supply chain is going to swing over to, I didn't have all the data on the chemical plant closures. The big guys in the room that know it way better than me had a list of over 100 that are affected now. I was like, oh, and their main concern is if Ukraine will get back open again or not, if those ports will be functional or not, because if they are not, then what you know is global agriculture has collapsed down into a global famine. They cannot get the crops. Everything that you can possibly think of was just absolutely ripped to shreds this year, like the canola crop. They were talking about just being so tight that massive losses in Canada. Well, you would expect that going into the grand solar minimum. And they were talking about cotton crop being the lowest since the late 1800s, and then the cotton seed and the press cake coming out of that is minuscule and almost non-existent. So there has to be substitutes for these things on the animal feed side. So there's one company that was in there talking about feed efficiency, like trying to tailor the ultimate diet for a cow based on their genetics to almost waste nothing by the time it comes out the backside. Because you've been in a cow pasture before. I don't know, is that anybody? I don't know if I can say this on air, but we used to look for mushrooms in the cow patties when I was younger. That they were just eating and then walking and eating and walking. Well, these are more sometimes in feedlots, or they're in feedlots and they go on grass after that last month. But the efficiency of getting every single gram of protein into that animal. And see, the thing they're finding is with his genetics to reduce methane, the fat content is noticeably, measurably. Noticeably sounds like it's a lot, but it's just measurably decreased. And the amount of milk production is also measurably decreased when they go to the cattle genetics to remove the methane, which is going to be all the rage. So as you look across the landscape here, the crops that we understand as being crops, corn is down. It's going to be a record loss. Like they literally don't have even categories to put the losses into. It's so outside of anything recorded, except the year without a summer in 1816, the Tambora eruption. So here was the presentation. So I was talking about the Tambora eruption that occurred a year prior. Well, not even a year. It's only been 9 months, 10 months. It was July 6th of 2020, or sorry, January 6th of 2020. A little tired tonight. Based on the Pinatubo eruption and the collapse in temperatures, that is a 1 year long period until it hits the bottom. And it kind of just gyrates there for a couple years until the ash falls out of the atmosphere. And then more sunlight, the heat returns, and then that pattern is in and out in 3 years, basically. So overlapping data from the Pinatubo eruption and what was reported with Tambora, we still have 3 more months of cooling to go in the southern hemisphere before it even reaches the coolest. And they're looking at a 5-degree temperature Celsius drop already registered in Chile, and we still got 3 more months of cooling to go. And the amount of rainfall and snowfall with all this extra particulates. So I pulled up these PM10 maps off of Null School compared to 2018 to 2022. And I mean, for me, even doing that data and those slides, I was just flabbergasted and shocked when I was putting all this info together. But you should have seen the people that were watching there. Like, you could watch them visibly see that and digest the information in their heads as to the amount of loss that is going to occur in the southern hemisphere. It is so off the hook of what is about to happen. So that's the thing with the electrical power. And the shuttle guys, these are corn shuttle guys. They move corn around on barge, on river. Nothing coming out of Ukraine. They're hoping that the agreements from Russia will be, extended or re-agreed upon, and that can continue to 2023. And I am absolutely unequivocally stating with a fist on the table here, if you hear that agreement between Russia and the Ukraine is not ratified again, this will plunge our planet into a global famine of the likes we have not seen for hundreds or thousands of years. This is how dire it is in the industry, the way they're talking about it. Their hope is pinning on the Ukraine that they can get fertilizer out of there from Russia, and they can get some corn and now wheat coming out of the Ukraine. The problem is, which I've talked about before, the grains have been sitting in those silos and storage and warehouse facilities for well over a year now. They have not been able to export it because that's last year's harvest. That's at the same exact time that never got moved out. So now they're in a rock and a hard place. They never moved the grains. They didn't store them well. There's been a lot of people in a war, just electric turns off. People aren't there. Lights aren't turned on. Rats get in, whatever. They're finding a huge, huge, huge amount of damage on the crop that's been stored that's non-exportable anymore to EU standards. So they got 10 plus million tons just laying around that they can't export anywhere. And now their new harvest is coming in, but the numbers that they had were only 30% of the fields got planted this year in the Ukraine. 30, compared to the 100% that was a year ago, 2 years ago, 2019, 18, 17. Okay, that in itself is a startling figure. Like, wow, that's crazy. But the problem they're going to have is they have nowhere to put the grain. They're literally going to need to use machines to empty those storage bins out. And we are talking massive port facilities, literally scoop by scoop by scoop with an excavator, or they just open it and dump it into the sea to then make room for the new crop that's coming in, because the only option for them currently is to leave that crop out under tarps. That's the only choice they got. And you start adding all this stuff up, and then the fertilizer shortages from that, Ukraine, Belarus, Russian area was a major. I didn't realize like the reliance we had on that. And here's another scary thing. The potash, I didn't know this, right? On the American border with the Canadian border, it's the second largest potash reserve in the entire planet. Why are we importing fertilizer? And this is the same thing they're asking, because price of production for an American worker in an American factory to go dig that out, process it, take it from rock into pellet or whatever, or chip. It's cheaper to do it over there and then import it into America than we can do it and go dig it ourselves. That's sickening. So they never really developed the area because it was always just cheaper to buy it somewhere else imported. It was already packed in the bags. It was already loaded for you. So now they're running into chemical shortages, which one of the persons there was like, yeah, if you can forward buy, I don't care what it costs you now, you forward buy it, or there's a possibility you might not get it. I mean, they always say there's a possibility, but the way I interpreted it was you buy it at any price because next year it's not available. And I'm thinking, all right, what is that list? Oh, it's everything. It is literally everything of a chemical or a fertilizer that goes into the farming process. This is where we sit. Now, the United States, according to their data and presenters that I was listening to, the United States will be the last place that will feel what the rest of the world will feel first. So if we're having a food price crisis, collapse, street protest because of food prices in America, then the rest of the world's on fire already. You're going to get some lead time into knowing that it will arrive here. We're already seeing street protests in 30 countries across the world at the moment about food pricing. At least 30. There's only 198 countries in the world, and 30 of them are battling on streets because their food's too expensive. Like at some point, it's going to roll to 50 countries, and the next it'll be at 100 countries, which will be half the planet. Like once you see that 50% rollover, we have very little time in the United States to prepare because it will come here last. We have the most land. We have the most, we can do everything ourselves, but it was just so cheaper to do it elsewhere that everything manufacturing, processing has just been let to die on the vine out here in America. I think it's on purpose. It's been since the Clinton era, and they were talking about how things were outsourced down to Mexico and everywhere else, that, we have a very viable agricultural industry here that we could produce ourselves with our own fertilizers, and if we could have our own chemical factories, but the greens are yapping, not in my backyard, and everything else. And with the steel plant shutdowns in Europe, that means that the tines and different kind of disc harrows and replacement parts, they're talking about how much stuff breaks. Everybody in there is there. Do you have a disc harrow break and that needs to be repaired? And everybody raised their hand every single year. And they can't get steel. They're like, we're already out of the repair parts, man. Like, there's no more. That's the whole thing too, is the equipment repair parts, the shortages that are everywhere too. They literally can't get like those round discs that plow the field to repair. So they're going to have a gap. Okay, they may be running, 100 foot wide, but you might have one or two gaps in there where the disc isn't, and it's just going to leave a gap. So then they're going to reduce field yield off of that because there's a gap. It can't plant, it can't till, it can't rip. Drills too, they're like talking the drill bits. Every time they're drilling these seeds into the soil, those things are plugging up, cracking up, breaking, bending all the time. Like again, if you don't have a driller to go in there and like set that seed in, then what? These are the very real problems that are here with us and most technologically advanced in many ways agricultural business on the planet. And we sit here at this edge of catastrophic collapse. And that whole Bill Gates thing, if I might follow up and add with one last point here, Ransom, is, the Bill Gates thing, and we see him buying land. He owns 250,000 acres of land. He's one of the largest, or is the largest agricultural land holder. But if you look at the tens of millions of acres in America, that's really just a pittance. It's nothing. Unless you start to look at the water rights involved with those purchases. He is not buying farmland. He is buying the water rights of all farmland in regional areas. That has to go through his gate first before the rest of the growing areas will get it. And that's what his purchases are about. And it's very cleverly and carefully planned. And I would encourage everybody out there to take a look at the amount of farmland Bill Gates has purchased in each state. And there's many, many maps of this. And then you can drill down by state and look where the water rights are held and where these rivers flow through. And every single 100% of his ownership land will be an aquifer or a river flowing through the property at, I wouldn't say even the start point. It would be more at the catch point where it starts to really fill itself. And if you turn that off, you're turning off a main line. He's not really worried about the small tributaries coming in to fill lakes, rivers, dams, estuaries, etc. He's focused on where that collects. And then the downstream from there is where the major amount of water comes in for agricultural production across the United States. Got to go through his farm gate before you get your water. And then, releasing all these things. And Dr. Robert Malone was there, and we had a chance to sit down and chat for a fair long time. And there's a lot of overlap in terms of what seems to be seen as an agenda, and overlap in what seems as purposeful for turning off our world and reducing the population. I mean, 2023, if you hadn't woken up by now, and I appreciate you and thank you for watching through and listening to our talk so far, if you haven't seen anything up to this point in 2022 that would have shaken you and gone into some action to get prepared with seeds, tools, community, etc., this ag conference I just went to, you might still be shaking on the floor from the data that you got there, but I exist in this world, so I process it a little bit differently as a point I could talk about in a video. But some of the people there, you could just see they actually lost hope. They went into what was there in the morning, having a cup of coffee, into depression at the table. That is crazy. I've seen the way that some of the people changed after seeing all this data. And I was making a joke, hey, you're going to need a double espresso from all these numbers I'm going to throw up here with these charts and thing. And you could just see people just like, I wouldn't say turn off, but their demeanor changed. Just like they really were processing it like, oh, holy smokes, we have a huge, like seriously, this is no joke. This is the biggest calamity in agriculture, at least in the last 200 years. Like our carrying capacity for what we can grow is no longer even at the break even. We're below that this year. And it's going to be well below that next year. And everybody's going to be vying for grain. And they're not going to get it. So then what gets affected? Well, the dairy. Then where's your milk come from? Where's your protein powder? You got babies, you say, well, I don't drink milk. I don't care. Okay, well, where's your infant formula coming from? The protein that's processed from that milk. Cheeses, all these things, whey powder, all going to be constricted because they can't get the grain to get them onto the feedlots out there to get the dairy cattle and produce. Like it literally touches every single, supermarket shelf, and everything that you're going to, put in your mouth in terms of a protein source like that beef. They're going to have real tough time keeping supply chains open and full supply chains. That was another thing. One last thing. I'm sorry, Ransom. I'm going to go to the last. I said last. My bad. But I did not know this. Currently, in the supply chain at any one time in America, at any one time, there's 1 billion bushels of grain ready for storage, getting on the rail lines, on barges, out on vessels, exporting, in the transit in trucks from a field somewhere to be able to then on-sell that or on-load to another, whatever it be. At any one time in America right now, there's 1 billion bushels just waiting, and it's moving. Or waited to move. It's not moving anymore. And they're thinking that might creep down to like 800 million, which at that point, then everything on our planet in terms of food pricing will not exist anymore. It'll be that valuable and non-attainable that we're going to go into rationing. We're going into rationing. And Ransom, I'll leave it there, man. I just like trying to think through this whole thing that I just witnessed was startling. And we live in this world. So for me to get that shocked where I sit down and go, oh, this is really it, man. It's difficult for me to see these events, but this, oh my gosh. We're toast, man. We're toast.
Well, I think it's important for people to realize where we're at on some of these things, and I'm kind of glad you brought up the water because I wanted to bring that up last week, and for some reason it slipped my mind. But since you said that while you were talking, I brought up a pretty good article that breaks it down. I mean, I've talked about it lots of times, but it's easier to just read who owns what and what that actually means. So let's go through this idea of, I'm going to say, the next 10 years of what it's going to look like for the average global citizen. And we'll start here. Major supermarket in UK planning to sell bugs as food to help poor people through the winter, because they already know that this is going to be a horrible winter for a lot of people because they've, planned it that way. And you say you can't help but feel like it's planned. Well, there's too much evidence in the direction of pre-planning so far back that it kind of boggles the mind that they would get everything to sum up at this point. But anyway, so you got here, they're trying to help people by feeding them bugs in the winter. So think peasant times. The food crisis of 2023. And as you said, if you get into this article, it kind of touches on a lot of the stuff that you were talking about. European fertilizer production already shut down, currency problems causing a massive headache for poor nations that need to import food, global weather patterns, of course, they got to throw that in there, and bird flu. And we'll get to that because this will be the most expensive Thanksgiving dinner in American history for the turkey prices. And they're talking about, according to Zero Hedge, it's just going to get worse. And we'll show you why we know it's going to get worse, and so do they. Here's one from The Guardian. BBC prepares secret scripts for possible use in winter blackout, citing that everything from telephones to internet to power will be turned off, possibly 2 days at a time, maybe 2 weeks, whatever. Anyway, according to this, the BBC has prepared secret scripts that could be read on air if energy shortages causes blackouts or a loss of gas suppliers this winter. So they have already planned on this energy struggle to cause people heartache, so that they'll be forced to feel like that they need to vote in for whatever the next thing is to fix it. And then let's move over here. Let's talk about water, because that's really important. We talk about land and farming and sustainable living and etc., but none of that can really be done if you do not have access to water. So the Great Water Grab is this article from our Santa Fe River. It's a great article. It's talking about who owns the actual water, and it gets in here and it breaks it down. And who owns the water? The new water barons are Wall Street banks and elite multi-billionaires, and they're buying up water, and they have been for the last 40 years all over the planet. So you can think about this, and think about this too. Goldman Sachs just met with Zelensky there in the Ukraine to see how they could help with the war effort. So you know who's actually behind the war effort from our side. It's the central banks and the lower banks that follow them. But right here, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, UBS, Credit Suisse, the Macri Bank, if I said that right, Barclay Bank, Blackstone Group, HSBC, they're all up there as the top people buying water. And then you got T. Boone Pickens, former President George H.W. Bush, which died, and his family. So you know the Bushes still control that. And then you got Hong Kong's Lee Kang-sing, if I said that right. And then you got a guy over in the Philippines. And these are all billionaires that are just buying up water all over the planet. They're buying it in like Argentina, they're buying it up. So right here, just by himself, billionaire T. Boone Pickens owns more water rights than any other individual in America, with rights to enough of the aquifer drain, approximately 200,000 acre feet or 65 billions of gallons of water a year. That's him. So what happens when Bill Gates and all of these other people own everything, from the internet messages that are getting out to your pharmaceutical needs, to your food needs, and the same group controls the water. And remember, these are the same groups that are pushing local governments to make it against the law for you to collect water naturally, saying that the state or the province or the country or et cetera, whatever municipality you live in, owns the rainwater, and not just the rainwater, but the runoff water. And we all know how it works with water on land. You have to have water rights to that water, and also water under your land. You have to own the water rights to that if you're going to be, putting a well up or trying to get any amount of water out of it. So if all of the corporations, billionaires own all of the water, how do the other farming, entities compete if they just turn off their water? Because they're not going to turn off their water for their own companies and their own usage. It's just going to be their competition, and no one can really say anything because they own the water rights, and that's how that works. So why would they be buying up water rights all over the world? And in that article, it talks about Northern Africa being one of the main places people are buying up water rights. So you got Northern Africa, South America, and places all over the United States just that we know about where they are going to control the farming. There's no doubt about that, because if you control the water rights, you control the farming. So, maybe if you want water, you might have to buy some Monsanto seeds, or, you can see where that goes, where it puts people in positions to do things that they wouldn't normally do, or make deals that they wouldn't normally do. And when people own the water rights, they can also use those water rights to pressure municipalities and other government agents to do what they want instead of the need of the people. And when you think about this, all of these people, the richest of the richest, owning the water, and then think about places like Flint, Michigan, and Mississippi, and all of these places where the infrastructure is falling apart, and these people have been sitting around for decades collecting billions of dollars to keep that infrastructure up. It leads you to other topics like the grid, and the same thing is happening there. These people that control it on the government end are not using the money to upkeep or evolve their systems to fit the needs of the public. Instead, they're allowing it all to collapse. And most of these things have time limits on it. Everything from a PVC pipe to a steel pipe to, like, you think of it, they all have lifespans. And it goes along with the automotive industry. The automotive industry does the same thing. You get a brand new car, you think it's going to last forever, but things are biodegradable and they have a shelf life on them, and they're designed to break after a certain point. So my point being with that everything is planned, obviously, so that while the infrastructure collapses, the billionaires and the oligarchs are collecting more and more, not only money, power, but rights, as we think about it. So the Constitution, not the Constitution, the Supreme Court has already ruled in the United States that having water is not a human right. And the reason for that is because people own water rights, and the government wants to keep the position that they also own the water that falls from the sky. So there's already places like in Oregon where you cannot collect it. There's other places around the US that are making laws right now where you cannot collect it. And this is all like a net that's kind of closing in on the individual sufficient living human being, where they cannot get power, they cannot get food, they cannot get information, they cannot get water, except for through these government and corporate portals. And that's the design. And then when we go back to this social credit score, how do you think that will fit in along with this carbon credit score? Because they're mushing all of these ideas together. And the only people that are going to feel the pain of this transition into this ultra, I don't know what to call it, ultra portioned reality, is that the peasant is going to starve to death. They're the only people that have no way to fight back this system. So even if you're at home gardening, what happens when the municipality turns off the water? Because they're, protecting the earth by stopping you from growing things, or the list goes on and on. You can't collect that water, you can't plant there, you can't use organic seeds. I'm waiting for that to actually come around the corner, is where governments start banning certain types of foods, which they have in the past, to where you only have the choice but to go down to Walmart and buy their one choice of GMO source of food with a little bit of bugs in it, and you can go home to your house that the electricity's turned off for the night so they can save power, and maybe your water's turned off, so because there's a so-called drought or water shortage. And then you realize that these are all systems designed to be lies. I mean, they're lies.
And welcome back We'll see you in a couple minutes here as we take the break. David DuByne right along here with Ransom Godwin. See you in 2 minutes and 2 seconds. We'll be back talking about what you can do to enhance your soils and what this dark winter entails for us.
See you then. Revolution Radio.
What would it feel like to have your health and wellness in balance?
All disease is simply the improper replication of the DNA molecule. FCE, full chronic extract, when you grow the plant indoors with no contaminants, and then you get 120 cannabinoids, what that does for your telomeres and for your DNA is incredible. It is absolutely the best as far as being able to get your health back. You know, a good phrase would be is there's no such thing as disease, just a lack of a good immune system. So if you can enhance your immune system, this is definitely the best way to do so. It's definitely the best thing from an immune system standpoint. If you take the position of, I just want to enhance my immune system, 120 cannabinoids is done through what's called the entourage and full plant extract compared to others that are out there and no contaminants. That's what's huge. So there's been tens of millions of dollars put into this and many people have had benefits from it type stuff. So this is about full spectrum and being able to get the entire benefit from the plant. This is the first time ever with a patented process to actually do that. You know, if you take iron supplements, there's 4 different types of iron, and then the challenge is you have to have stuff that goes with it so the body will absorb it.
So this is a lot like when you take vitamin D so you can absorb the other vitamins. You kind of need the full spectrum of vitamins to get the benefit of each individual one.
Absolutely. And the thing that people notice the most is sleep. They have really, really deep sleep and they sleep extremely well. And if they stop taking the product, then immediately their sleep is disrupted again. This is something that the Chinese and Egyptians and so on and so forth. So the research is more than just recent, it's extensive. So full plant extract, it's done indoors, aeroponics. Once you've got that, then you can get the full spectrum. People find that it resets their metabolism. So there'll be a lot of things that they're eating now, including sugar. It'll make it so that you will not desire to be able to consume the things that you're having challenges with. So wheat, dairy, sugar, all these different things. It'll balance your system so that it'll get you to the point where your metabolism is correct and your palate, what you desire to eat, will change drastically.
The entourage effect is a proposed mechanism by which all the cannabis compounds interact exponentially in a synergistic manner to modulate the overall effects of the plant. The benefit of the entourage effect is the increase of the therapeutic experience. More compounds consumed in whole plant medicine typically means a higher likelihood of pain relief, anti-inflammatory action, anxiety relief, just to name a few. The endocannabinoid system, ECS, which is now being recognized as arguably the most important system in the human body, since it provides some degree of master control over all the other systems. In short, the ECS helps to balance many of our physiological systems and supports the body. The fact is, the ECS impacts just about everything, including appetite, immune response, calorie burn, pain and inflammation, and even cellular health. Its most important overall function is homeostasis, which basically means that it helps to keep the body in a healthy balance.
The change is coming up in the food pricing and the inavailability of medicines because China has shut off the spigot for base chemical materials to produce our antibiotics. A lot of things are going to shift, and having something that's produced in the United States that seems it covers 2 different arenas something that's going to happen with your body because your food choices are going to change. And at the same time, if you're unable to get whatever medicines there are out there, there could be a substitute on a supplement or something more natural side versus the chemical side.
We're going to get back to your host.
And welcome back for the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. David DuByne right here with Ransom Godwin. Before the break, we were talking about agricultural loss across the planet and then what's envisioned by the biggest leaders of the ag industry moving forward into 2023. And how this is just going to affect our lives. So, a lot of times on platforms, we're not able to talk openly about this. So thank you, Revolution Radio, for giving us a voice and allowing us to stream as a seed point going out to the rest of the world. We're still getting everything on the tech side set up so we can stream across multiple platforms to bring this message to a wider audience, and also the voice from Revolution Radio out to digital airwaves in the video space. So if you consider information like this valuable, consider a donation, freedomslips.com. Donate tabs right at the top. Multiple ways that you can continue to support free speech. How valuable is that to us now moving into this phase is the thing. We have all these voices here talking about it. Ransom and I talk about it. We're trying to put data together. We're trying to make a wider picture, synthesizing data across a wide array of disciplines, of connecting disconnected dots that do make sense once you make the connection. Well, a lot of people don't want to hear that in the control narrative space. Once you identify some of those connections, part of the cat's out of the bag. The tail is out of the bag on the cat. The paw's out of there. The paw's out on the cat, and get that back in the bag. So censorship does occur. And here it does not at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And we're here every night, 10 p.m. to midnight, Thursdays, Studio A. And Ransom, I appreciate you joining me. Now, we were talking about water rights, water shortages. Bill Gates not really buying farmland for farmland, but buying that land to control the water rights, moving through multiple points of the main ag space and the flows of irrigation into that. So welcome back. And yeah, if you could continue on, because I was super interested listening to you as we went on the break about the control of water, where you can't even harvest it off your roof because some states have said, well, we would sell it on in the water stream. And I'm thinking, really? You got how many how many millions of people in each state, and you really think that 5 families collecting rainwater is going to somehow affect your revenue? Because you got to look at that. And the same thing with gold and silver. Talking about the confiscation, et cetera. There's less than 1% of all Americans who even own precious metals. Less than 1%. That would be the same with rainwater collection off your roof. Probably 0.25% even. But then they want to pass laws so that 0.25% of the populace cannot even harvest their own rainwater. It's not about this is revenues. It's about reducing your ability to get off centralized systems. But now their whole thing is to get you back on centralized systems, because in the collapse phase, which you're in, economic, food, they're going to get you back in under the rationing cards and completely, how do we say? You're going to be subservient to be able to get your allotments. You disobey in any way, shape, or form, they are going to destruct your ability on the digital side to purchase, and on the digital side for your digital rationing card to be able to go in and purchase items. This is where it's going. And Ransom was pointing that out with the water before we got on break. So Ransom, thanks for coming back for the second hour with me. And yeah, man, I'd love you to continue along the point of water, because that is seriously the most valuable thing on the planet here, this water, what we need to grow crops.
Yeah, I was just wondering how that's going to work out when, although these tycoons own the water rights to the land, they don't actually occupy the land. And the only way for them to do that is through government to enforce any of that. So, if things did go tits up, how are these billionaires going to enforce their ownership of the water? I don't know. It doesn't really make sense in the long run, but it does show you that they've been planning. And when I was going through these facts and pieces of this article, most of them go back to September of 2003, when Goldman and Sachs first started being the largest private equity of private water, and it just keeps going on. And they're talking about that, water is the oil of the 21st century. And then you skip a decade into about 2015, and Goldman and Sachs and the other ones are still claiming that still is the oil of the future, and that's where all the plans are going. And it kind of really links in a big deal, or in a big way, to what you've talked about Northern Africa's aquifer. And it kind of ties into the whole Great Reset and possible changing growing zones. And after watching Bill Gates talking about that exact topic, about how they would have to move their resources and farms from one place to another by 2030 and 2050 because of the crop yields decreasing. And, like I said before, I don't know if they're talking about all crops or he was talking about just the, kind of crops that they own. But what they were calling them was climate sensitive crops. And with everything else that they've been pushing as far as propaganda on the climate, that words have power. So when you come up with a new phrase like climate, climate anything, right? So these are climate sensitive crops, which makes you wonder why are they already planning this far ahead to actually move grow zones? And he started to get into that. And we've been talking about this giant aquifer in Northern Africa. Now, who owns all of the water rights to that? And you can see that it's probably some of these billionaire oligarchs, maybe people from Saudi Arabia, Dubai, but most of all is the banks that are the smaller banks of the central banking system. And then when you think about, was this or wasn't this planned all for this time period, it kind of shows you that absolutely it was. They knew it was coming for at least 2 to 3 decades. The people that are in the know, like the Bushes and all of these people, are buying up what they know will be the future in control, because water and food are kind of hard to separate. So if you control the water, then necessity says you're controlling the food necessarily. And then when you look at this stuff where these, BBC and others, and I'm wondering what the secret scripts for the U.S. are, because you kind of mentioned, do you think that America will probably be the last to feel the real repercussions of a global famine and some of these issues? And the reason why is because the whole world looks to us as far as media, entertainment, propaganda, etc. Most of the outlets for the entire world are actually coming from the United States, and a lot of them that you think are foreign media services, you'll find out that they most likely have some of the same ownership that's telling them the same thing. So whenever they're openly admitting right here on this thing about having secret scripts to tell people, don't worry about it, don't worry about the power going out, you would think, well, if they got scripts for blackouts and people freezing to death in the winter, then they probably have scripts for war, and they got scripts for this and that. And then where did those scripts come from? And here's a little bit of woo-woo. I've talked about it many times. A lot of these scripts, so-called scripts that the media uses, are written by an AI. Now, who programs that AI? I'm not exactly sure. I haven't got that far into the research. I'm sure it's a guy that has, an agenda, and he puts it into the AI. The AI writes a speech or a script or news or whatever, and it comes out. And even this algorithm of trying to hide the information is squeezing out information about us starving to death, freezing to death, and the future of warfare. So it's kind of hard to ignore them, especially when in every arena you see the same type of propaganda. And notice that the food is left out of most of the mainstream ones. They'll talk about the power crisis. That scares people. They'll talk about weather phenomenons destroying everything. That scares people. They'll talk about nuclear war. That scares people. But food scares people more than anything. And they know when people are scared about food, they will mobilize. And they don't want people to mobilize until they're ready to starve them out. Which is kind of the importance of shows like this and discussions like this, and pretty much the whole permaculture movement on trying to figure out how to grow your own food, where to grow it, how to use nature to help you grow it. And which brings me to another topic. I think because of the era we're going in, where they're warning us in our faces that they're about to turn off every facet of human resources that we use to be a civilized, world, as far as civilization goes, and we're not all out like Mad Max. We're going to have to start getting used to finding new food resources. And no, I'm not talking about eating the bugs, but some surprising things happened in my garden. I planted late. I remember I told you that before. I tried again on August 1st. I planted a bunch of corn, squash, tomatoes, etc. A lot of that popped up, and I had a second growing season here in the Southwest. And I actually got a little bit of food, not a lot. We would have starved to death if we were depending on it. However, today I was out there picking my, native corn, and I got one that had these gigantic kernels of corn on it that looked like mutant kernels. And I broke one open, and a bunch of black powder came out of it. So I kind of got freaked out. I thought it was like black mold or something. I washed my hands real good, and then I went and did a little research, and I find out that it's actually a delicacy that's growing on my corn. It's a fungus that grows on corn in certain environments. And in Mexico, it's considered a delicacy. They make all kinds of stuff out of quesadillas, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of dishes, but it just, kind of dawned on me that me trying to grow this food, I ended up finding a totally new food source. And I'm showing people some pictures of this fungus that grows right off the corn. So this is a completely edible fungus, and it grows right on the corn there. And actually in Mexico, they can't wait to get this, and it makes the corn like 4 or 5 times bigger than the cob of corn that you were going to get. And all of these, chefs around the world are paying lots of money for this stuff. Because it's really rare, I guess, and it only comes up at certain times. But the idea of eating other food sources, so the Native Americans in Mexico and probably the southern U.S. figured out a long time ago that there was this weird blight kind of growing on their corn. Somebody was brave enough to cook it and eat it and found out, hey, it's edible. So that's pretty neat. But getting back to the point of alternative food sources, we're going to have to get to a point where we know the North American continent so good, or wherever you live in the world, that you know the place so good that you know where to find the water, you know where to find the livestock or wild game, and you know where to find food off of the land. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about in spring or at harvest season, but there's food out there all year round in most places. Now, unfortunately, I've studied this to some degree. In North America, there really aren't that many food choices in the wintertime. If there's some kind of situation where the grid is out, the grocery stores aren't working, and you need food in the wintertime, really in North America, you may find some berries in some warm places, but for the most part, you need meat. You need meat, and the only other real thing out there are things like nuts that you could possibly find that were left over that maybe the wildlife didn't eat yet, and bark off of several trees. And I don't think many Americans can survive off of trying to hunt and get bark. And it brings me to another point, that the propaganda that they are doing about climate change and destroying the world and all of these things are so powerful. I actually saw a guy being interviewed, and you might have saw this too, where he was probably in his mid-20s, but he completely believed that the world needs to stop farming to save the planet, because that's what's starting to come out of the climate weirdos' mouths, is that regular farming is contributing. And remember, a few months ago, they came out and they were saying, oh, they're going to have to stop Australians from growing so many, cow and whatever, because the farts, and they keep coming up with these ridiculous ideas. But the problem is young, uneducated, kind of naive people in the millions or even billions are buying into this propaganda to the point where simple ideas like growing food to eat is something bad in their mind. So this kid thought that, we need to hurry up. There's a time limit. We need to stop all these farmers from farming so that we save the planet. And more and more of this nonsense is coming out. And imagine the future now with this amount of propaganda. And then you add in ideas like nutrition, starvation, which clearly alters the mind. We know this. It only takes a week, 2 weeks before things get totally crazy if people are actually starving. But just being hungry, not starving, but just hungry and agitated and being fed propaganda about who's to blame for your situation, you can see how that can turn into a total nightmare. Because it already is. I mean, I can see it. Whenever I see kids saying that we need to stop farming to save the planet, the planet has lost its mind, as a whole.
Yeah, that's not a road you can go down. They probably think food comes from a supermarket, and that's all they know is it comes from a supermarket. Where does that come from? Well, no, the food's in the supermarket. Why would you waste your time gardening and spending all that backbreaking work to put the shovel in the ground and get the dirt and then throw stuff in it and mix things and then finally plant, and then you got to wait. And then there's insects and stuff, and you got to wash it after you get it home. Well, why don't you just go to the supermarket and get all that where it's already done for you? You're going to save so much time and energy. I'm like, okay. Excuse me, but these are really the types of thoughts that are coming across in a percentage of the public. And what we've seen so far with this misguided 1% of the populace lifestyle now dictating what 99% of people can or cannot say, what happened if it turns into this insanity where they want to stop farming, but when you say, whoa, if you stop farming, we're not gonna have any food. Oh, you're banned. At what point, Ransom, I'm kind of curious in the timeline of everything. If it's being fed in and drip fed today, so if we can step back a couple of years, what is the drip feed rate of madness and then suppression of thought, stifling of conversation from introduction point into where we sit now, where even PayPal is going to scrape your money because you don't kowtow to the 1% or less than 1% actually of a population. These are the things that with these cleverly constructed narratives using corporate washed, spun, and regurgitated media, mainstream media. I mean, is talking about winter garden seeds now going to be a bannable offense where they'll demonetize you? Because I talked about kale, I talked about cabbage, kohlrabi, and all these mighty heavy leafy greens that are just the most all-stars for micronutrients and vitamins and that sort of thing in the winter months. Was that suddenly verboten to talk about growing lettuce in this shoulder season here? You can get a quick, 60-day rotation crop before it gets too cold because lettuce loves the cool. People will say, well, I couldn't grow the lettuce in the summer. Well, neither could I really. It's always too hot. That's why we plant in, late February. And then it gives that month to start to warm it up in March, and then boom, right in April, then it just starts hitting its sprint. Then we'll get, continuous production. What about talking about making tinctures from elderberry or black walnut husks yourself that are dropping right now in plentiful amounts if you can get to those black walnuts before the worms or the other thing in the forest that wants to nibble that beautiful, juicy, succulent inner protein source? I mean, how far is it going to go? Are they going to make it illegal to start? If they're making it illegal to collect rainwater on your own roof, on your own property, are they going to make it illegal to wild forage also? Because suddenly you're taking money out of the corporate revenue that would have gone in. So somehow you're not allowed to even wild forage because you're denting into the bottom dollar of the corporation. The only reason they have power is because the power has been given away. And at what point does it get so stressful and so unattainable to buy food where that power is taken back to the people? Like the thing about history, and I always say a history book is your crystal ball about what's to unfold across the planet. Because I encourage everybody to dive back in history and check out these chapters of massive losses of population during events, whether it be volcanic or electromagnetic. And the same three things collapse every single time, and then you can kind of overlay and see where we sit in that trajectory moving forward. So just an example, Maunder minimum, I always talk about this because most of the temperature charts on repeating cycle are based on the 1640 temperatures overlaid with what's about to drop off in solar cycle activity. 25% of the world's population perished at that time. 25%. 5%. Now you have to ask yourself, was it a global liquefaction event, otherwise known as a mud flood? Was it something else? Because, as soon as you get to that population loss area, well, it becomes quite murky to find any kind of reliable statistics. And if you go back into the 1400s, there's even a full gap in any kind of measurements that were ever kept. Like they had a full 10-year gap of like literally nothing written in a journal entry, nothing written on a manifest, nothing written in a clearinghouse. It just literally stopped. So they have 0 points of anything for 10 years back in the 1400s. Like what has gone on where you don't even have enough population to accrue and mark like a check mark? Yep, we got 1 bag of wheat. We got there's nobody even there to do that. And then I'll take you back to the 535 AD through 538 eruption phase of 3 major VEI 6 or VEI 7 eruptions in culmination, one after another. Bam, 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 bam. That blocked out, and they had a year without a summer. It was a year without a summer for a decade. For a full 10 years, they had it was catastrophic. And you'll start to see, if you're looking at genome again, you'll start to see a real constriction around that time of mating pairs, and I hate to say humans are like mating pairs, but, in an animal basis, we are. The constriction, the 8.2K, which is 8,200 year prior event of massive cooling instantly. Now, the entire global temperature dropped some 3.5 degrees Celsius, and the only thing that can explain that is volcanic activity, because they experienced something very similar, 535 to 538 AD, massive wipeout. So, when you start to see the end of the Roman Empire, yeah, it really was happening in, say, 300, 400 AD. And here's the thing I never thought about. I was sitting with this guy having a bunch of drinks last night or the night before, and he's like, did you ever think about biblical verses written to describe the events of 79 AD, which you talk about in the squaring of the planets occurring in 2024 in October, is the same exact matchup geometrically in the skies as we see the planets in their orbits as 79 AD. But he's like, that's when a lot of the Bible was written and a lot of the extra verses were put in there. And, he was phrasing it like, you realize if that was such a cataclysm of global food loss, that would be the book of Revelation. And his whole framing of the question to me was never about religion. It was about, at that time they understood it was a cycle to encode it in religion for future, multi-thousand years in the future messaging, that when these events start to occur again, you better get ready. And that was kind of our discussion, pretty deep, and a lot of things overlapping in terms of cycles of history where there is like total collapse, 79 AD, 535 AD, 1400s, 800 AD also, 1600, and there were some chapters around 1200 in there, the collapse of the Mayans and these sort of things, 800 AD. You start to get into different classical periods of when they're dating historical societies around the world, and you're like, whoa, these are all sitting up on the same timelines here. Global famine, global droughts. I've done a ton of videos on, they're saying, it's the biggest drought ever in Europe. And all you have to do is swing over into a bunch of reports coming out of China they overlap like 8 different things that happen during a drought. So one of the most fascinating for me was, they were talking about the yield of the grain, obviously, pricing for sure. But they also had this line in there that was blue that was for civil unrest. And this thing went back like 800 years. Droughts overlaid, and then the severity of the drought and the river readings at the times on the severity, and then they started, assigning severity indices to the droughts in China, and then there's definitely an overlay on there on how much civil unrest is, how much crops are lost. Like that's a no-brainer. Even like anybody in a statistics course day 1 could see it so plainly. But then you start to look at it, and what they consider the droughts right now are nowhere near close to the biggest droughts that they've had. Not even remotely close. This is in the mid-range. So all this spewing garbage of, it's the biggest drought ever across Europe because of global warming. You didn't do enough research. Definitely didn't do enough research from the 15 and 1400s forward, because those drought stones that were there in the 1400s, you missed all that, especially the catalog data from peer-reviewed research. They mapped out all these drought stones across the entire planet And those dates go way back into the 1400s. So, yeah, the rock emerged again, but you see that date that's below the waterline now? Means it wasn't as bad as it was 1400s. You didn't do your research. Then you start to look at these patterns that are evolving and the things that we see in cyclical patterning. And then you start to map that up and say, where are we going to go? So, Ransom hit that on the head perfectly. Like, water is going to be the most important thing for you to have. You can't cook without it. You can't bathe without it. You can't grow food without it. And once you could be the toughest mountain man, mountain woman on the planet, but as soon as you get too unhygienic, your body's going to get sick. Access to water for cleanliness is going to be another thing. I mean, go to some of these desert areas and see, I could see why Islam slid in there because, even in their rites, when you're looking at how to bathe with such a minimal amount of water, that's talked about in the Quran on actually how to take a bath with minimal water in drought conditions. Like, this exists in all religions, these passed down messages about these cycles. Doesn't matter which religion. Especially the Indian Vedas. Oh, sheesh, they're going back like hundreds of thousands of years. So the best guess for 2023 would be, I don't know, hyperinflation, because another thing that was sort of talked about, but a lot of people weren't getting the gist, was cross-border payments using digitized physical assets with a repository in both nations that would honor those agreements and those smart contracts to deliver said asset. Like talking about carbon trading and carbon credits and allocations in the cryptocurrency sphere and the whole digitized asset movement across borders. They're in the headlights. Like, well, the one guy's asking me, dude, I don't want to buy this gold thing you're talking about. I just want to know, do I need to go buy a bunch of grain right now based on your research of the Southern Hemisphere eruptions? It boils down to that. Like, dude, how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to move money or value across the border that's accepted between two parties? Like, these are the kind of unknowns that people aren't putting and plugging into the equation. Okay, you got a full currency collapse. That happens every time we come into this cycle. Currency collapse, population migration and reduction, and then a restructuring of government. Because after the cycle ends, then the government believes they still have the power to try to rule over people, but frequencies changed, and then a new way of governance pops in. So just take it back to the very base here of economic upheaval during these collapse periods. How do you pay for something across a different country that might have a collapsing fiat currency? Because if I know yours is junk, I don't want it, but I will take digitized gold where I know in a depository I can walk in there with my smart contract and you're going to give me like 100 pounds of gold over the counter, literally. Or 50 kilos, whatever. 100 kilos, 1 ton. Like, I can walk in there as a bearer note on demand and say, give me the 1 ton of gold. Or I want to take equity out of that and I will leave that as a deposit on collateral. And then I get working capital in my own country based on that. Because this is going to intersect pretty interestingly here as we move through. So, Ransom, I don't know where it takes us because I don't want to get us banned tonight. So, ivermectin is over the counter now in Tennessee. Yet you will find 0 places that will sell it to you. None. Online prescription areas, nope. You got to have it filled in the state. There are none here. I've probably been into 15, no less than 15 drugstores, private ones, the Walgreens, and everything in between. Nobody will sell it to you. So even things that are now deemed legal are still not attainable. So as we go into 2.0 through this whole mess here, I don't know. There's going to be more control. That's all I'm going to say is this digital rationing card is inbound. And see, once you put that digital rationing card with cross-border payments, then it starts to make sense on where the world has moved to already in the planners. Because, Ransom, you were talking about, they understood these crop losses were here or coming in inbound cycle 30 years ago, and they were planning, and now we sit here. Well, the same thing. They knew the economy would collapse, and then suddenly cryptocurrency pops out in 2008 and 9. Suddenly, just in time to really get legs in a lot of distributed ledger and settlements with DLT over on RippleNet and R3 and a few other privates. That I can't believe that's introduced and up and running right at this point where fiats are going to collapse and we'll have an alternative payment system at the same time, dude. That just, there can't be this many things overlapping. Come on. Even somebody that doesn't understand anything would be like, it's a little quirky. There's like 50 black swans out in the front of my pond out there swimming around.
You know, you were talking about all that stuff, and there, you keep keeping it in a question format. You know, like, did they plan it? What are they planning? And I'm in a different spot. I feel like they're just telling us what they're planning in our faces. But I wanted to point out how, you know, like I was mentioning a minute ago, their propaganda works so good that people think these weird things. But then there's another aspect of it. This is an era, you know, unlike, say, the Renaissance, where people were learning different sciences. You know, like somebody that did astronomy was also playing with inventing stuff, and they were also reading the ancient books, and they were philosophizing, and they were learning all this stuff. They were learning how to guard. I mean, they knew all kinds of stuff. They were like 10 times the mind of people now. So kind of, and you mentioned, you know, these temperatures going up and down. And I think a lot of people don't realize, or at least I should put it a different way, the whole idea that man is going to control the climate in any way or shape is a ridiculous idea. And let me give you an example of why. It's because they have no idea what the actual inner cycles are. There's cycles inside cycles inside cycles, and everything on this planet lives on those cycles. Like every form of life on this planet has some kind of cycle that interacts with the environment in some way to have special conditions, from fungus all the way to mammals. So I point out this article from AP. It's a mysterious breeding habits of aquarium fish have experts, you know, confused. And it talks about how scientists and breeders and all these people, they can't figure out how to breed these fish that are coming from the coral reefs, and they can't get them to reproduce. And instead, they just go out and they use poisons to poison them, and then they get more and they bring them back because they just don't breed in captivity. And now they're finding out that that was kind of nonsense. And the truth is that they just didn't understand climate, the global environment and the cycles within it, and how the animals interact in that, and how some of them go extinct and how some of them explode in numbers from different circumstances. I'm sure you're familiar with algae blooms and other things that happen in the ocean because of temperature variations. And then, you know, I thought it was kind of funny because it goes along with what you were pointing out about the droughts, and that there's obvious long recorded history of when these droughts happened and how low it got. All of the rivers, you find these stones all over the world. But not only that, they're finding a lot of crevices where people lived, buildings inside of stuff that was under things. All kinds of stuff from the old world are popping up. But it's not the first time that they've surfaced. Because all of these cycles. So they find out that these fish, you know, they couldn't figure out how they breed, and they kept trying to have exact conditions of the degrees of out in the ocean and the conditions. And then they, one time, according to this article, this big fishery, the power goes out, and they couldn't control the temperature of the water. And then all of a sudden, these tropical fish are just breeding. They're laying eggs everywhere. It just shows you that they don't even understand that. And not only that, it goes back to the idea of trying to control the environment without knowing the repercussions of what you're doing. So, you know, even if they did get some kind of system to control the temperature worldwide so that, you know, they could say they're doing that, what they would be doing essentially is killing off millions more species because they don't understand how these cycles and inner cycles work. But it just goes to more of how the world is now a bunch of morons. And, you know, I kind of count myself into that because I had an opportunity to be a lot more educated when I was younger. And instead I went out and, you know, I went to the school of hard knocks instead, and then kind of caught up on my education later. But here's a group of German scientists, and I'm showing everybody, that glued themselves to the floor of a Porsche luxury shop, right? So these are brilliant people. I'm high IQs. These are guys that design cars, motors, etc. They're scientists, but they weren't smart enough to think that what are they going to do? Look, what are they going to do when they glued themselves to the floor and they have to go to the bathroom, right? So these are brilliant people that couldn't figure out, hey, if I glue myself to the floor, I might have to go to the bathroom, and then I can't do that. And then they whine, and they're also so naive to think that everybody else in the world owes them something because they're protesting against the climate, right, or the oil, or whatever it is that they're protesting. And they expect people, that they're mad because no one gave them a bowl to go to the bathroom because they couldn't think long enough ahead of time to figure out that wasn't going to work.
Well, they end up. What? Hold on a second,
No.
man. Did they end up peeing themselves and all kind of stuff, or what?
No, I think what happened was they couldn't handle it, and they just kind of gave up on their thing, and then somebody helped them off the floor. I don't know if because I didn't look into it because I couldn't get past the idea that these supposed brilliant people didn't think about having to go to the bathroom. Just the simple things, but here's another thing that kind of adds to that. There's an overall brain fog out there between the propaganda and just not being educated. Not that people are dumb or anything. Actually, it's that they're ignorant. I think that's the proper word for it. We've become such an ignorant group of people on the planet that you could tell them anything and then they start believing into it. And so a lot of those people are having problems. We know that a lot of people have problems with, their mental state, and they take pills. And we also predicted that around this time, they'd start cutting off the medication. Well, that's exactly what's happening, but they're calling it a shortage, a national shortage, not only of Adderall, that a lot of people take, and they think that, that it's basically speed, but, they use that to work, or they use that to level out, or whatever they're using it for. And there are, I don't know, thousands of these kinds of drugs that are now going to be in shortage, which means that a lot of people with mental disorders are not going to be getting them. But on the other hand, fentanyl is pouring in all over the place. They can't seem to stop, where that's coming. That's coming. And it just all shows you. So let me get a little woo-woo with you.
Go big on the woo.
All right. So I believe it's all planned, and there's no talking me out of it. All of these different things, from food to power to civilization crumbling, and the ideas that they're giving out. So I want to go here. And this year, when all of these real programs got going, that we could really see the difference, was 2022. Now, I paid attention to 2022 from the beginning because it's one of the few years that has a 666 in it, just straight in your face. So earlier this year was 6/6/2022. There's 666. Now next year will be 2023. 2023. And I kept looking at that number, and I thought, there's really no significance with that, other than the 23 a lot of people trip on. But then my dyslexia caught up with me, and I just looked at the number backwards, and I see 322. And what is that? That's the skull and bones number. That's the symbol for death. Right. So next year, when all of these things finally catch up, it's going to be in reverse. If you pay attention to numerology there, we'll have the year of 322. So I'm saying that it's going to be a death, and death related. So we got war, we got famine, we got turning off the power, they're cutting off the pharmaceuticals, they're controlling all the water. So you can just start pointing these things out on your finger, and you're thinking, wow, they just have that all. They got the propaganda in the media. So they got the brain covered. And then you have people like this, Stacey Abrams, and this is where I'm going. It's a giant death cult. They're getting people ready. So I don't think the real, catastrophic deaths will still be happening for 5 to 10 years. And the reason I say that is because partially we're still in the propaganda phase. So you could go back to the origins of depopulation and eugenics and follow that out. I don't want to do it here because we're on a YouTube feed, and they might get mad, but I can talk about this because it's headline news. Stacey Abrams floats the idea that we can fix inflation by increasing the number of abortions. That is, having a lot less kids. So, that'll fix the pricing, according to her, which obviously she doesn't understand economics. However, you start seeing the same theme coming anywhere, and I brought it up in the past. Everything is about depopulation now. So the Pentagon is now going to provide funds to help troops doing the same thing, seeking abortion. So there's money for that. And it's not really about the argument of when and where, whose right it is or nothing like that. My main point is that in every arena of propaganda and media, they're pushing the idea that human beings are bad. They need to die. They need to stop having children. They need to stop using energy. They need to stop eating food. They need to stop farming. They need to basically stop breathing. And in order to make that happen and to shame them and browbeat them into this with propaganda, they make everybody feel guilty, and to the point where they will have everybody on this planet believing that they need to pay money for a carbon tax, which is basically a tax on existence and breathe, which puts us way, way scientifically past the idea of, sir, you're eating the king's deer, right? It's the king's deer. It's the king's rabbit. It's the king's food. If you're growing it on their land, etc. We're going back into these times. And then you get to look into the minds of these nuts that are running everything. And they're all talking about, yeah, why not? Nuclear war's fine. It won't really hurt the planet. And they're right, because we've talked about it. They've exploded 2,000 plus of different kinds in the air, in the ground, in the water, and we're all still here. So they know they can commit, mass genocide on a global scale and blame it on a war that had to happen, maybe fighting over resources like power and food, which there is an abundance of on this planet. Yet we've created a situation where there's not. And it just kind of, here's an article from the Mirror alleging that Vladimir Putin already tried to detonate nukes, but his plan was sabotaged by his own people. And you can just go on and on here. U.S. Army, they can't get anybody to fight. They've lowered the standards. Now they've also lowered the weight rule. They removed the restriction in some of the areas like the Army, where you can now have a felony. So they're trying to get criminals. They're trying to get fat people that are out of shape. They're trying to get anybody they can to fill the ranks. And mark my words, the draft is soon to come, because that's the time in the cycle again. And then we get back to the propaganda of them trying to convince people that the planet is in such dire shape that you need to turn off your electricity and your lifestyle and eat bugs. And why bugs? I mean, I got to ask you that. Well, I think the reason that they're using bugs now is because that's a sign of, a famine in the Bible. So it connects to that. That's one aspect of it. But the other one is every future dystopic movie about from anybody, people in the future were eating bugs to survive because there was no food, there was no water, all of these things. And, it's all lining up to be reality here. And I don't see how people could think that this is an accident. And they've named it like Dark Winter, the Winter of Hell. There's all of these new names for the era we're going in. And they're already preparing. We know that. Like I said, they have secret scripts already to tell the public. They have the propaganda in advance before the actions on the ground happen. So every event that you're about to see that's going to blow your mind in the next year, possibly big things. Like I said, they've been incrementally happening. All of that stuff is all pre-written, pre-scripted, and ready for this phase and this turnover. So it makes me wonder, and it kind of gets back to that. If they know the magnetic field is collapsing, I think that they know that there's an urgent need to control the mind and the soul of human before a certain point when they can no longer control it. Some kind of singularity that they are scared about, and maybe it happens cyclically, like everything else, and most likely that's the case, and it's happened before. And every time this happens, they turn off the information, they turn off the power, the food, the health, and any kind of resource that a human society would need to function. And they create a living, let's say, hell on the earth. And, they rebrand everything. They pull up new flags, and then you're in a new era with brand new. And you can see examples of that, of like how Monsanto got in trouble for their glyphosate and Bayer got in trouble for their SV and their aspirin. Well, you know what? They used to be the same company. How about we just go back together, and then all lawsuits or problems? Well, that was the old companies. That wasn't us. We went to the office and reincorporated as this new company. So you can't do nothing for us. But it makes you wonder, are they really scared? Because I think the reason that we've been seeing all of these CEOs and world leaders slip into the shadows is because they don't want you to remember their face when everything happens. So they're trying to disappear, and they're getting out of it. I had nothing to do with that. It wasn't me. It's, what's going on now. And we surely didn't plan it.
Yeah, electromagnetic changes occurring. And I spoke a little bit about Neptune's atmosphere reversing, and then this new stories coming out going, oh, we've been studying Neptune for 20 years, and look, it's cooling. But then on Jupiter, they're seeing that the atmosphere expanded 80,000 miles, and the temperature rose 1,200 Fahrenheit in the top of the planet, where what we consider northern lights comes blazing down onto Jupiter. And what's interesting is the NASA photo, they reversed it the other way. So you can't really see, if you were looking at a magnetic connection from the sun out, it would start at the sun, and then it would do this big like rainbow arc over, and then it would have sort of an angle to it, boom, where it would connect with Jupiter. But they just reversed the photo, so the connection point is actually pointing away toward the outer planets when it should be. That connection would be at the sun. Electricity. Our brains are electric. The way we process information in reality is based on those electrical connections in your brain and the magnetic field around the hemispheres of your brain staying at a whatever level. Put a value behind that level. What happens when frequencies change and your ability to observe reality around you suddenly, you'll see it as clearly as Ransom and I that things are planned. But what if that happens to the entire populace at the same time? Like literally one day or 2 days or a week later, the frequency has changed enough where 8 billion people see it. Then what? Well, they're going to be none too happy. And at that point, you're going to see that the populace rules the planet, not the elite, or self-proclaimed elite. They believe themselves to be such. But knowing these electromagnetic changes are inbound along with these changes of government, see, they're keeping, everybody distracted as can be from anything in the heavens increasing that would validate that our planet is just one of the 9 affected by the sun. And then 2, they're bringing in all these measures and just forcing things down your throat in terms of laws and ways to talk and what you must eat. And there's really more like a prison control system now in play. But the biggest thing is the distraction. Now, this frequency change that's occurring right now is going to sweep through our planet, and has begun to. It's begun probably 4 to 5 years ago, and you'll see that how many mass awakenings have we had? The central banking was one of those. Occupy Wall Street was another. Then we swung into all the food riots across so many nations. 25, how many nations were in Europe that were under food protest asking governments to turn back on the pipeline? I think it was 22 to 25, somewhere in there. It was increasing every day. So they're pointing the finger at the elite or these rulers of the countries and go, dudes and chicks, you turned off the gas. Our lives are becoming miserable. Food's expensive. Turn it back on, or you no longer have the right to rule. And boom, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 down. And then suddenly, who are you going to protest against? So what they do is they deflated that movement. And I will say the same thing in 2019 for those of you who were distracted that didn't see it or unaware of it, because a lot of news was trying to bury this. There were street protests literally in 20 plus. It seems like that's the magic number. When it rolls over 20 countries in something happening against the elite, they squash it with more distraction. But if it helps their cause, they allow it to run through all nations. 2019, the overnight lending repo market was broken completely. At some points, they were putting $800 billion a night into it to keep it afloat. And they, central banks around the world understood, hey, we can't keep doing this. I mean, sheesh, this is not going to last. And then whoosh, COVID comes in, and suddenly quantitative easing, and they could print as much money as they needed to for everybody to still then reset that system with just doubling the amount of the money supply on the planet for a reason. Most of it not in your pocket or mine, most of it in company coffers. But you can see where that's heading to now that we're coming into, okay, the pipeline's gone, so they can't actually point it at government as they turn it back on. Well, now it's just become just outright electrical and food, You can't, see, they maybe put themselves in the corner because they can't turn that pipe on again. So then what? As soon as you see the 20th plus that is actually making the news, not a single one-day event or something, like Ghana started to go off heavy as well. They were all into these green agendas and, the whole 2030, their whole entire cabinet switched over to it, and now there's electrical shortage there, but people woke up and were like, no, y'all are gone. So these things are sort of flash in a powder keg kind of things versus sustained, movement of people saying our foods are too expensive, y'all need to go. This is going to really amplify this winter. And, Ransom, when you were talking about the new strain that they were developing and that I think it was 80% of the rats didn't, make it through these experiments, perhaps when the food shortages get to the point where the populace reacts, that's really absolutely going to disrupt the system. At that point, we may see this next one flowing in there. Not sure, but something nefarious, like you said, and not really kind or friendly toward humanity is here. Not going to, it's here. There's a play. It's moving its moves across the chessboard. And you just have to wonder, how fast is it all going to take place? But I'm going to say using the benchmarks of food riots across countries that are no longer because of energy. It's just gone strictly for food at that point. Energy, yeah, okay, whatever. But once you see it's all about food and the news headlines are dominated by the food shortages, once it reached the 20th, 23rd, 24th country, that's when something else for a distractive narrative to distract you will be unleashed at the Uber. It'll be, like you said, something nuclear. I've already seen some headlines coming across today. Oh, there's this nuke in this city and whatever. They can't identify, they can't verify, but it's the ear to the ground. Indian whispers, bro. Nukes in Ukraine in a city already. Or could it be a massive one that really does hit and your only escape is run into the countryside, and by that point you won't be able to get back in the city to rebuild your supplies, because if that's sweeping through the cities and you're safe out in your countryside, you're not going to want to go swinging back in the cities to go get more supplies. So that's insanity. I really question whether I ever go back to Nashville again, ever. Because the amount of 5G and noticeable frequency distortion and interruption in that place, noticeable to me, clear as day. Couldn't live in the soup. Don't want to go back to the soup. It was literally mind and body bending. Truly it was. That's how high it is tuned up there. And it is really spooky to get in. And because, on some ley lines, you can feel that. You can feel your teeth, get that metallic taste, and you can get that buzz in your head. Well, just walking through parts of a city next to those towers was doing the same things. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's not even turned up. Maybe it's only at 0.1% of whether they really take it, and that's the effects already. I'm not sure. But anyway, Ransom, take us out tonight. I'm curious on your last thoughts on how we can throw the tennis ball of information over in your court as we sign off tonight.
I would have to say just pay attention to what the banks are doing right now, because they are definitely up to some kind of major move. When I see Goldman Sachs and other bankers meeting with Zelensky, and at the same time simultaneously having a secret meeting offshore that's invite only, it kind of brings up thoughts of Bilderberg, Davos, and other, secretive meetings that these people that run the world are having. So the evidence is there for them all scrambling to get together some kind of plan that they have ongoing. And, the reason for the supposed meeting in the Ukraine was the banks were going to help the Ukraine stop disinformation and see how they could finance further what's going on there. So you can count on this being a focal point for the next, I'm going to say, half a decade of problems and the blame game, just this one little situation. And then when you pay attention to what's going on in China, which I have been, and I've been watching all of the leaders' speeches, and according to them, they're about to go into Taiwan this year before the New Year's. And I've also seen a couple of headlines that say that the U.S. believes.
Wait, sorry,
which
New Ransom Wakasabi, which New Year? Chinese New Year or Western New Year?
No, Western New Year. Happy New Year's.
新年快乐 for those of you speaking Chinese out there. So I split the hair on that because, you know, it is a festive time and not sure how people would react to that because Chinese New Year is a sacred time of the year. Family comes together. Thanks for listening to David DuByne, Ransom, Godwin, signing off Studio A, Revolution Radio, 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time. See you next year.
Thank you for listening to